The world's easiest diet to melt belly fat, backed by science. No injections, no starvation, eating real delicious food while reducing your risk of all the diseases that are killing most Americans and enhancing gut health. What am I talking about? Two key dietary changes to make, and we're going to go over the research and why it's so important. But first, just a little bit about belly fat. It's more precisely called visceral fat. Viscera are just your organs, so it's fat around your organs, and that's what creates a lot of pressure in your abdomen. This can lead to one of the favorite topics here on this channel, which is hiatal hernia and acid reflux, but even more seriously, it's leading to increased risk of, as I said, all the diseases you're trying not to get. Heart disease, type 2 diabetes, dementia, certain cancers, obesity, of course. So all of these diseases are linked to visceral fat, and anything you can do to really make an impact in that obviously affects you in so many different ways across all these diseases, in addition to basic gut health like acid reflux and hiatal hernia. Now, we're distinguishing visceral fat or belly fat from peripheral fat. So if you have an enlarged buttocks, if you have enlarged thighs, we're not talking about the fat anywhere else. We're talking about it right around the midsection, because that is the dangerous fat. Okay, so the first study was through the British Medical Journal fairly recently, but it was a very robust study, and they looked at the Mediterranean diet, and they had three groups. It was a randomized control study, which is the very best type of study, randomized control trials. And so in the one group that did the best, putting people on just a basic Mediterranean diet decreased their visceral fat by about 4%. They followed them over the course of about 10 months, but 18 months. But the key group was one that had two major things changed about the diet. So they had the strong Mediterranean diet, but they increased their polyphenols, and I'm going to tell you what foods those are in, and they decreased a bit their saturated fat. Not a lot, but just sort of watch the saturated fat and push them a little bit more toward unsaturated. Okay, so what are polyphenols? Polyphenols are chemicals found in dark berries, walnuts, almonds, green tea. It's very high in green tea, so very high in those dark berries and in the green tea. Also in spices like cinnamon and turmeric, and you can look online of all the foods that have polyphenols in them, but those are the big ones and pretty easy to get. And I'm going to go through my exact list of what I want you to do dietarily at the end, so you'll have a bit of a checklist for yourself, and that's also going to be listed in the interpretation of this video. Okay, so they increased their polyphenols, and what they found was a decrease of visceral fat by 14%, which really is huge. That's making a huge dent in the visceral fat. So again, they weren't starving themselves, they weren't doing injections, they were just eating real food, but they tweaked it a little bit. The other major thing that they looked at was, as I said, the saturated fat versus the polyunsaturated fat. And one thing that we want to look at with decreasing your visceral fat is to have a healthy gut. So interestingly, they found that before we get into the saturated fat, the polyphenols actually act as a fiber, so they're increasing the good bacteria in your gut, but they're also decreasing the bad bacteria. So it's one thing to increase the good bacteria, but to get in the way of the functioning and reproduction of the bad bacteria, that's sort of like the golden ticket. So these polyphenols are your friend, and there's a number of different ways to get them in your diet. Okay, so on to the saturated fat. What they found was that saturated fat directly was associated with visceral fat. Now, there are certain diets that are high ketone diets, carnivore diets, where kind of all somebody is eating is quite a bit of fat and just animal protein. And those diets seem to have a different mechanism associated with it. So I'm not talking about those kind of extreme diets. Personally, here and at the clinic, we do like a more diverse diet that includes you know, all the food groups. We like fruits, we like vegetables, we like nuts and seeds, we like good fat, we got like good protein. So that's our direction. So know that. But you want to sort of keep track that your saturated fat intake is not more than 20% of what you're getting in a day. So you look at what's called your macros of your carbs and your fat and your protein, but also within the fat category, not more than 20% coming from saturated fat, because that really affects the metabolism in a bad way. Okay, so let's get on to the tips. So starting with protein, that's so important that we get enough protein, and we're talking about a gram of protein per lean body weight. So, and lean protein, so lean twice. So if you, let's say you weighed 150 pounds and you really needed to weigh 120, that was your goal weight, then you would base your protein intake on what you want to weigh. So the lean you that you're trying to achieve. So you would have about between 100 and 120 grams of protein per day of lean protein. Now, that's not to say you're living on chicken breast, but you kind of just want to watch that you're not getting that high saturated fat, as I mentioned. So a nice balance of good cuts of meat and of course eggs and dairy, it's all in that protein category. But when it comes to the saturated fat, do a little dietary analysis and see how much you're getting and watch the percentage. Okay, now for the polyphenols, 2 cups, so that's 2 servings of dark berries per day. So you can put them on your yogurt, which is another recommendation. You can put them in a smoothie, but try for organic and the dark berries. Then we have 2 cups of green tea. You can get decaffeinated green tea if you find it gives you the jitters. Matcha's great, a very good quality matcha, so that's a green tea. Very, very helpful, and again, the polyphenols. Now, low oxalate greens, so some wonderful greens that are also high in polyphenols, and they go and they break down your fat better. So that's what this is all about, right? We're trying to decrease our belly fat, decrease our visceral fat. So things like arugula and asparagus, broccoli, kale. You can look up all the low oxalate greens, but get a serving of that every day. And then aged cheeses like a pecorino romano, and that has a very strong taste to it, but it's very rich in CLA, which is conjugated linoleic acid, and that's a type of fatty acid that again improves your visceral fat by reducing it. Also, the aged cheeses, those hard aged cheeses, the pecorinos and goat cheese, they're very low in lactose. So if you're dairy sensitive, a lot of times that equates to being lactose sensitive. And there's almost no lactose in a pecorino romano. Ditto for the fermented dairy. So I have a favorite yogurt, and I don't tolerate dairy, but I can do fine if it's low to no lactose. So you can look for lactose-free products, and again, if it's a sheep or a goat cheese that is aged, they tend to have very low lactose. So you can kind of play with that and see how you do. Okay, then there's intermittent fasting. So in between meals, if you can have a good 4 hours in between your meals, that allows what's called your migrating motor complex. You can just think of it as your house cleaners in your gut that kind of sweep out the debris and just give your body a break to heal. And you need about 4 hours in between meals to accomplish that. And then even better yet, overnight, a 12 to 14 hour fast, not to go beyond 15. Otherwise, you can have issues with heart and gallbladder. This is per Dr. Walter Longo's work on fasting, and I do have a lot of respect for him. He's been around for a very long time. So that's that for intermittent fasting, and then having a serving of collagen or bone broth to help heal the gut. Also eliminate all ultra-processed foods as much as you possibly can. There's emulsifiers, there's dyes, there's a lot of things that cause inflammation of the gut, cause leaky gut, and that's going to increase the visceral fat as well. And last but not least, I mentioned a little bit earlier, a half to a cup of fermented dairy every single day, and you can find a lactose-free version, as I mentioned, and this is increases the short-chain fatty acids in your gut, so that's feeding the good bacteria, and that good bacteria up, visceral fat down. That's what all of this is about. So I hope you found this informative. These are pretty easy tips, and I think if you focus more on getting these things in your diet, then some of the bad things will just tend to fall away. And you'll notice, obviously, ultra-processed food is not in here, alcohol is not in here, sugar is not in here, but there's all that, there's all those beautiful berries. So just start to focus on, I've got to eat this, I've got to eat this, I've got to eat that. You'll be more satisfied with the good food. You'll miss the bad food less, and it'll just start rebalancing in your diet. Give yourself some time, but that belly fat diminishing is certainly an aesthetic change that you'll probably like, but more importantly, it's a metabolic change and a health change that is going to do your body so much good. So I hope you found this helpful. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Send me a comment. I answer all my comments, and I love to hear from you, and also consider subscribing to the channel. That helps more people be able to see these videos. I'll talk to you soon.